So we're in your United States history in chapter 4, the second section, and we're going to be talking about the French and Indian War. A lot of times we don't hear too much about this, but the French and Indian War is very important because that war in the colonies, this is before we were had our war for independence, before we were independent from Great Britain. This war kind of set the stage for our war for a revolutionary war for independence. Let's find out why and what happened. French and Indian War? Well, we're going to talk about the struggle in Ohio. We're going to talk about the Anglo-French conflicts, Anglo meaning English, English-French conflicts, and the first clashes. Then we're going to talk about Benjamin Franklin again and his plan for the Union. And on to the British advantages and French advantages of the war, and the course of war, and the siege of Quebec, and the Treaty of Paris. So these all have to do with this war, this French and Indian War. You see the pictures there? The French and the Indian were on one side of the war. So most of the Indians fought for the French, and they fought against the British. But again, the colonists were British at that time. And so the colonists and the British fought against the French and the Indians. So let's find out how this war began. So there were struggles in Ohio. As you see in this picture here, you can see basically what was the British territory. The British territory being the British colonies here. And then you go up here, you'll see Canada was British. The French territory was Louisiana, all of this. And there's Texas over here in Florida who were Spanish. That's the way it was right then. So right in between this land, between the British colonies, in Louisiana, there was the Ohio River and the Mississippi River, this area right here. And that area was where the turmoil began. Why? It was right between the French and the American colonies. So the struggles between Great Britain and France prepared America for independence. England had established the colonies. So these were the British colonies. They were still with England, right? And then France, but France here was a profitable fur trading place. And the most of the people that came from France, they were friends with the Indian because they were trading with the Indians. And so the Native Americans, many of them actually trusted the French more than they trusted the English. They knew the French better. And the French had a long history of even marrying, taking Indian Native American wives too. I have to add that to it. But these two, the British and the British and the French here were clashing in the Ohio Valley, west of Virginia and west of Pennsylvania, this area with the stripes. And they fought over this territory for fishing and fur trading with the natives. So of course, the French fur traders wanted to go into this area and basically get their furs and trade with the Indians there. And of course, it was getting very close to the British colonies, and they were in that land already. So there would be a clash between France and England. So the Anglo-French conflicts. So if you see here, this picture here, you see the United Kingdom and you see France here. So if you look in Europe, and they're not very far from each other, are they? England and France. Throughout history, they had many wars. So you can see where there was, the theater of war that happened a lot here. But this whole thing of UK and France, they were fighting, and they fought. They had different wars between 1689 to 1763. One was called King William's War, 1689 to 1697. Queen Anne's War between 1702 and 1713. King George's War, 1744 to 1748. This was all going on in Europe. And so these wars, because we were a colony of England, that we were kind of forced in, to supporting England against France in every way that we could, right? The colonists were. And these were started in Europe and they spread to America. But in 1754 to 1763, a war started in America and spread to Europe, opposite. They called this war the 7-Year War. This was the French and Indian War that I'm talking about, the 7-Year War. Britain and the colonists, basically England or Britain and the colonists, were against the French and most Native Americans, called the French and Indian War. You see here the French trading with the Indians, so the Indians were actually friends with the trade. Here's a French soldier, and here is the pictures that we have France and England. You know that England is the redcoats, and we have France fighting in Europe. So basically, those conflicts were brought to America, and then started in America with the conflict in the Ohio Valley against France and England in America. So the French and Indian War, the first clashes. Well, the French moved into that Ohio Valley. And of course, that Ohio Valley was actually, England claimed that Ohio Valley. And so the French, though, moved in there and they started building forts for their fur traders, right? To protect their interest in the Ohio Valley. And the British took measures then to remove those French troops out of that Ohio Valley. There was a governor in 1753 of Virginia, of the colonist governor. He was royal, he was of the king's royal governor to Virginia. His name was Robert Dinwiddie. Here's a picture of Robert Dinwiddie. So Robert Dinwiddie, he lived 1692 to 1770. He sent one of the colonists into this area to tell them with a message warning the French at Fort Le Boeuf to insist that they vacate the fort at once and get out of the Ohio Valley. So who did he send? Guess who? George Washington. Here's a picture of young George Washington. Here's a picture of George Washington. He sent George Washington in there to say, tell the French to get out of there. At that time, George Washington was fighting for, the colonists who were of Great Britain, right? So the French, though, refused to leave. And so let's see what happens then. You see here, see how Washington now, he sits in and ends up getting the ammunition and actually bringing forth a victory without even fighting. Colonel Washington, remember George Washington, attempts to recapture the fort. Washington took the stock of the French armaments. So he took the stock of the armaments at night. And then he returned to Governor Dinwiddie, then he was promoted to lieutenant. Colonel Washington advised the English to build a fort at the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers. And they are right where Pittsburgh is today. So at those rivers, he said, we should build a fort there, because if we don't build a fort here, the French are going to come in and build a fort there. So the French captured that site, though. George Washington told the English to build a fort there, but basically, the colonists and the English did not. Dinwiddie didn't. And so the French captured the site and built Fort Duquesne. And so basically that fort now was French. Colonel Washington attempted to recapture the fort with the Virginia militia and to drive the French out of the Virginia territory. The French sent reinforcements to prepare to defend the Ohio Valley. So France is sending in some reinforcements. George Washington now is leading, and he's leading for Great Britain at this time against France, and trying to get in. And basically he's advising the English governors what to do, and they actually are not listening to him very well. So in the midst of all this, Benjamin Franklin sent forth a plan for the Union. He calls it the Albany Plan. They're still colonists. We don't have a country, and we are basically, Franklin and George Washington are, fighting for Great Britain, England, right? And Benjamin Franklin knew that the war was imminent. It was coming. So Englishmen in America and England had to form a united front together for the colonies' defense against the French. He said, we have to unite. Our colonies need to unite. We're not united. We need to unite against the French, or the French are just going to come and take us over. So in 1754, 7 colonies sent delegates to Albany, New York, where Benjamin Franklin was. And Benjamin Franklin put forth this Albany plan. And the governor, he said the governor general was appointed by the king, and they would have a council of delegates in the colonies. They would have power to manage Native American affairs and to pass laws and to levy taxes for defense, so they can get, weapons and stuff together. So this Albany plan, he wanted to unite the colonies that weren't united, to bring them together so that they can actually raise money to be able to defend themselves against France. Well, guess what? Was it adopted? So, right here in his plan, it says, would allow the colonies to raise their own taxes, raise their own armies, build forts, wage war on the French, build settlements, town, and have treaties with the Native American tribes. That was all in his plan. And I like this picture of it. It says, join or die, But guess what? The colonists did not accept it. The colonies basically said they did not want to surrender power to tax a central authority. They did not trust each other yet, I guess. And so the colonies did not want to surrender their power to doing this at this time. And then the British, or the English, actually refused it too, because they thought the colonies would have too much power. And so Benjamin Franklin's Albany plan failed, but it did set a precedent for the future, because in the future the colonies would unite, but not against France. They'd be uniting against Great Britain. Sounds like a pretty good plan to me. Franklin was quite a genius. The British advantages of the war. Well, the British had a lot of advantages of having a superior manpower. In fact, they had 20 times more men in the troops than the French had. 20 times. So they had a lot bigger militia, a lot bigger army, and a lot bigger navy. And they also had agriculture, trade, and industry to keep the troops supplied and fed. The colonists would take care of the troops that came in and keep them fed and supplied. France didn't have that. And the British also had control of the high seas to interfere with the French troops from landing and stuff. The British Navy was very much of his advantage against the French Navy. So you see, those are some big advantages. But the French had advantages too. The French had a centralized colonial government that Britain had to deal with the colonies that disrupted the speed in military decisions. Basically, the French were centralized. They just could make their decisions, and they would have their general, and they do it. Well, the Britain had to go, they had to talk to the colonies first before they could do anything, right? And so France's, when they stepped forth in the military, it'd be quicker. Well, also French had a fortified city of Quebec to defend the St. Lawrence River. So Quebec was a huge city for France. I wouldn't say it was a huge city, but it was defended well. And it controlled that whole riverway of the St. Lawrence River. And then the French also had the alliances and friendship with most of the Native American tribes. And so they convinced the Native American tribes to fight for them, which the Indians did, because they knew the French had been their allies before, and they knew a lot of their trade had to do with that come from France rather than England. So again, the French advantages. The French had the extensive system of forts in the St. Lawrence and Great Lakes region, especially Quebec. It had the single system of command. They had one command, and England had to go through the colonists and had to figure things out. It had a better relationship with Native Americans due to the trade of hunters and trappers and traders. They had a good relationship with them. And the French were better suited in fighting in the wilderness. That England came in and just fought, with their red coats, and they stood in long lines. And basically the French, especially the French fur traders, they were better suited. They knew the wilderness better than England did. Although not better than the colonists, of course. The course of the war. Well, it first looked grim for Great Britain, with one defeat after another. there was a general here, and here is a picture of him, General Edward Braddock, and he was defeated in taking Fort Duquesne in July of 1755. So basically, the British marched in these neat rows with their red uniforms, and which Colonel Washington warned against. He said, we shouldn't do this. They're going to just we're going to get ambushed. And the French did come in and ambush them as they stood, because they stood out in the woods. You got red coats on, you're easily to be able to be shot at, right? Because you can see them in the woods as they march through the woods. Braddock lacked the knowledge about the wilderness warfare. He didn't know anything about fighting in the wilderness. And he was mortally wounded, and he lost his troops to the French. So England, or what I should say, Great Britain, was defeated in the beginning. I like this picture down here, especially in this corner picture right here. Here's the colonists fighting, and there's the redcoats. So the colonists came in and fought, and really defended the redcoats back then. But as you could see, the difference in the way the French and the Indians and the colonists fought as wilderness fighting, and the British came in and fought like they were in an army in Europe, right? In rows of redcoats. William Pitt the Elder, in 1708 to 1778, he became prime minister then. So when he became prime minister, things got better in this war with the French and Indian War, and the tide began to turn. His goal was to drive the French out of North America altogether. He really, really did not want the French there, and his wars were against French in the history. So, and he would flood America with British troops, as many troops as he needed to come to America to fight the French, so the French would not take over the British colonies. So he had cooperation between the Army and the Navy, and that was all working because of William Pitt. Here's a picture of William Pitt. Actually, this is William Pitt. I said this is William Pitt, and this is his general, James Wolfe. He became general. Remember, Braddock was killed, that he basically brought in the British troops, and the French just, ambushed them all, and it was a total defeat. Well, now we have this young general, General James Wolfe, coming in, and he was more qualified to lead the British troops in America against the French. The Siege of Quebec was the turning point, though. The French fortifications in Quebec, Canada, and it fell into British hands. As a victory in 1759, the British captured Quebec from a cliff above the St. Lawrence River. How did this happen? Well, this British general, James Wolfe, he lay in the river below. And the French general, Montcalm, believed he was safe, and that he said, "There's no way we're fortified. We're just fine. There's no way that England could come in and attack us, right?" So he decided to remain in Quebec until winter, and he thought in the winter the British troops would withdraw, because he said Britain doesn't like Canadian winters. It's cold, But General Wolfe, the British commander, led his men up a steep, unguarded hill in the back to a field called the Plains of Abraham, behind Quebec. And the British attacked Quebec in the early morning, and Montcalm was not ready for them to come. He did not believe that the British would attack in the midst of all this. Well, and then both General Wolfe, the British general, and General Montcalm of the French, both of them were killed. But the British took Quebec. And when they took Quebec, that would probably be the end of the French and Indian War. Quebec was the sturdy fortress that France held, so that they thought that they basically was undefeatable, right? It was a victory for the British. The French were losing the war, and the fight ended in 1760. And the French defense in the West Indies, India, fell to the British too. So the British not only won the war in the Americas, but also around the world against France. In 1763, the fighting stopped altogether. So this is some pictures there of George Washington there on the top, and then you can see the fighting in Quebec here. And this is a American soldier fighting with Britain. The Treaty of Paris was the treaty after the French surrendered to Great Britain. And so this is what the terms of the treaty in 1763. It affected North America on the whole, because the whole North America changed. France surrendered Canada. Now, who would control Canada? Great Britain, England. And all the territory east of the Mississippi, except for New Orleans, was given to Britain. Great Britain. England controlled that. All of the Ohio Valley, that area, now Great Britain would have. New Orleans and the French territory to the west were granted to Spain and France. Spain was forced to give up Florida because Spain was fighting for the French too, right? They were against England. So they ended up giving Florida to Great Britain, which was a big deal. And the British colonies assumed everything east of the Mississippi River. Half of the continent now had changed hands at the scratch of a pen. Half of the continent was now going to be controlled by England and not France. So let's read the Treaty of Paris in 1763. The treaty that officially ended the French and Indian War. The British gained control over the area west of the 13 British colonies all the way to the Mississippi River now. The French agreed to give up any colonies in North America that they had, including all of Canada. They gave it up. Since Spain had helped the French, the Spanish were also gave up Florida. But the Spanish still held their territories west of the Mississippi River and in Central and South America. And we know the part of the Louisiana still there, that the west of the Mississippi River, that French still had New Orleans, right? Okay. So this is what happened at the Treaty of Paris, that the land started changing from France and Spain to England, right? Okay, the fundamental differences as the war happened. Well, the war ended in 1763, and the colonists rejoiced. Wow, they won. England won, and they were still loyal to England. The Appalachian Mountains were clear of the French now, and the colonists now could expand as pioneers with freedom up into the Mississippi River and the Ohio Valley. And now they were starting to regard themselves as true Americans, with America this area being their land. Here's a picture of a colonist fighting in the French and Indian War. They didn't fight like English, so. And this is a picture of the French and Indian right here. So spiritual differences. The American revivals were widespread and long-lasting in America, and religious freedom would lead to self-rule, as England would come in and try to take away religious freedom from Americans. They would fight. The representation in England was not good. Colonists were not being represented in England for any reason, right? And so the religious freedom later would lead to the First Amendment, where it says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So that was happening. Military differences. Well, the British brought their troops, but American colonists had done much of the fighting. Why? Because Americans lived there, right? And they differed from the British troops in manner and purpose. The colonists fought to protect their home and their family. But the British fought for wages or money. The British troops came and they just fought for their money and they avoided risks, because they didn't live there. And the main colonists found British Army incompetent. Well, yes, they found that the colonists that fought found that the British Army was pretty incompetent compared to the way they fought. They saw that the British fought, in the midst in lines in their red coats, and he thought, this is crazy. And the colonists fought, from the woods, in a different manner. And so they thought, wow, this British army is not as competent as we thought. And this would affect the war from independence that would be coming on. Economic differences. The Europeans saw Americans were healthy, well-fed, and productive. As the troops went over there, they said, these Americans are doing pretty good over there, huh? And so they also saw that they were productive with agriculture, and there were no famines in America like there were in Europe. And they were physically healthy to take on great tasks. And the Americans felt very different from the British, The colonies were coming together now to help each other. It's a picture of the colonies coming together to help each other. So things are going to happen now as Great Britain will come in and put taxes and all kinds of things. We're going to find in the next section why America had to stand up for Great Britain and how Great Britain threatened them, the colonists, on their economic, religious, and political freedoms. And that would be the beginning of the Revolutionary War, or the War for Independence. So that's it.